first of all, I just want to say, I got the book when I got home, and I had not a chance to read it, obviously, but I skimmed it, skimmed a lot of it tonight, and I'm just blown away. Like, it is so amazing. Like, way to go. I mean, it's hard, but it's beautiful. And if any of y'all don't have her book, it's called Fear Gone Wild. And it is just, if you've experienced, I would say general grief though, Kayla, like, I don't think it's just for people who've experienced mental illness or suicide, but I tell you what, it is so honest. I just was blown away at your honesty. But Brooke Talley, do you know Brooke from
I love Brooke.
She's amazing. She sent me this text today. She said, this book has been a huge part of my healing. Huge. Now, she just got it like 3 days ago.
Wow.
After Doug passed away, we couldn't make sense of anything that happened. I had an investigation, and for 7 months, so many of our friends were praying that one day I would have answers. The answers that I've craved for almost for 3 years came flooding in last night as I turned the pages of Kayla's book. I can relate 100% to every word Kayla says. She talked about exhaustion from being a mom, but also needing to be there for her husband and not understanding the panic attacks and fear, not knowing how to support. Every single word was our story, with the exception of this. We never had a diagnosis.
Wow.
And I just wow, just wow. I thought, what a tribute. I'm like, okay, now you have to go share that on Amazon. Of course. But
that's so sweet. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that that's coming off the pages, and that's the way it's coming across. And that's my hope. That's the reason I wrote it, is that it would be healing and helppul.
Yeah,
so I love that. I love her. That's amazing.
I know, so sweet. So for those of us who are on the call that don't know you, because I think we just have a lot of family members who have just experienced suicide and didn't, out of the blue. And like the last few months, I've gotten so many messages, a lot of people who are like, what just happened? Can you tell them a little bit about your story? And then, of course, I have like 50,000 questions that I can't wait to ask you. So anyway.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I had the dream life. I was literally living my dream life, married to my dream guy, in an amazing home, raising 3 beautiful boys in the trenches of ministry. My husband was a lead pastor of our church, and so we were full on in ministry. Our lives revolved around Sunday, and I loved being a pastor's wife. I found my little niches in ministry. I was serving on the women's ministry team, help leading our event. I was serving at the MOPS group. I was helping him behind the scenes. Like, I was so proud of our life. I would sit on the right-hand side in the front row every single Sunday, and I was so proud to call the guy on stage my husband. Like, I really just loved my life. And then in the fall of 2017, my husband started having panic attacks, really out of nowhere. We had a stalker issue that I think invited just this sense of fear into his mind and into his body. And it just spread like wildfire. So he was having panic attacks like 3 to 4 times a week, very debilitating, very terrifying. It would take over his whole body, and it would last for hours. And he wrestled with those from about October 2017 until April of 2018. And it was really hard. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. So he was seeing specialists, we were doing blood work, trying to understand what was going on inside of his body. And eventually he had a massive panic attack that landed him in the hospital. And we all said, enough's enough. Like, this guy needs to go on a sabbatical. All the tests at the hospital said he was fine. Like, nothing came back abnormal. So we're like, what is going on? What is going on inside of his body? Why is he suffering? We can't live like this. Like, it was horrible. He wasn't sleeping. I wasn't sleeping. It was just really hard. And so a few weeks into the sabbatical, he was diagnosed with depression. And I'll never forget, being in the psychiatrist's office, and the psychiatrist looked at me and said, your husband has depression. And I was shocked, because Andrew was like this invincible, strong, like, led our church and led our family through a really tough season. Like, I really just thought that would never happen to him. And he was relieved, because he had been struggling with these panic attacks for so long. He was relieved to finally have a diagnosis and finally know the cause of why this was happening inside of his body. And him and the doctors were both super confident that he was on the low end of the spectrum. He was going to bounce right back with rest and the right medication and taking time off work. Like, he was going to be just fine. And so I trusted the doctors and I trusted my husband and I tried to support him the best that I could. We did therapy for 2 hours every week. He saw a psychiatrist every other week. He was taking medication. He did solo trips to go spend time in solitude with God. We did a 2-week road trip, just the two of us. He went and spent time with mentors. Like we really were doing everything we knew to do. And the doctors thought he was getting better. So they released him to work in August of 2018, and he hit the ground running and gave 2 powerful messages on mental illness. He called the series Hot Mess, and he was using his own story as the example. And then headed into the 3rd weekend, just had a really bad day at the office. You know, he wasn't fully healed. He told our church staff and told our family that he was at about 65%. He wasn't at 100% of healing, and he wanted to ease back into ministry. And so he had just a meltdown. And so we're like, okay, this guy's not ready to go back to work. Like, okay, let's take some steps back. Like maybe he shouldn't speak on Sunday. Let's find a guest speaker. Let's maybe talk to some other pastors. Maybe an inpatient place is the next right step. So while we were away from him for a little bit, trying to figure out the next right steps, he attempted suicide. And we were completely shocked and completely stunned. The team of doctors was completely shocked and completely stunned. Like we really did think he was getting better, and we didn't know that it was that bad. So he was rushed to the hospital. They ran a ton of tests, and there was nothing that they could do. And so on August 25th, he went to be with Jesus. And I was handed a brand new life as a widow and single mom of 3 little boys. They were 2, 4, and 5 when he passed away. So that's the story. Yeah,
absolutely. It's so funny reading the narrative when you wrote about when Andrew passed away, like just the way you went back into the hospital. I mean, it was like I was reliving my own life. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, just the little waiting pod and the way that they came out. And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's so reminiscent. This is a big question, Kayla, but how do you think the church can help change the narrative around mental illness and suicide? Like, I mean, where's the starting place for that? Because I don't even think we're not getting barely scratching the surface.
Yeah, you know, I think the church has come a long way in the last 2 years. I've been so just touched and grateful for the way that pastors are opening up more and conversations are happening more. And I think because there's been more public deaths by suicide like Andrew's, that the church is starting to understand and is starting to have empathy. But I think we still have a long way to go for bridging the gap between mental health and ministry. But I think part of that is just understanding, it's so simple. It's just understanding that mental illness is a real physical illness. It's not a faith issue. It's not a sin issue. It's not the result of not praying enough, not spending enough time with God, not like having spiritual disciplines. Like it's not the result of that. It's a real physical illness. There is a real chemical imbalance happening in the brain, happening in the body. It's not something that can all the time just be prayed away. I know I believe that God can do supernatural miracles. I've seen him do it. I know that he can. And sometimes people just get prayed over and their depression is gone and their anxiety is gone and they never suffer again. But that is not the case for everybody. And so I think understanding that it's not black and white. All mental health stuff is so gray, and what works for one person isn't going to work for the next person. You know, sometimes medications work and sometimes they don't. Sometimes therapy is healing and other times it's not. Sometimes just being prayed for is like supernatural healing and you're good to go, and other times it's not. And so I think understanding that and really just trying to, instead of jumping to criticism, remembering that we really have no idea. We have no idea what it's like to walk in anybody's shoes but our own. And that can apply to so many things, not just mental illness. Like we have no idea. And who are we to try to jump to criticism or judgment? And it's not a faith thing. It's not a sin thing. I watched my husband run to God. Yeah. You know, I would walk into the bedroom and oftentimes he would have these big silver headphones on and he would be weeping. And like, I could hear the music coming out of his headphones. He was like blasting a few songs that were his favorite songs that summer, and he was running to God. You know, he was begging God for healing. I was begging God for healing. Like, we were running to God with his pain, and God didn't heal him this side of heaven.
Yeah, right. You talk in the book about the suicidologist who describes it as a psychache and not like a headache, but psychache. And I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, that was like, I'd never heard that. Can you talk a little bit more? So basically, the psychache is a pain that darkens life. And I don't know, Kayla, that just resonated with me. I was like, I've seen that. I've seen that. I mean, Rod experienced anxiety and depression. So I have like the beginning stages of what you went through. We were kind of earlier. It didn't get as far, I guess, but it felt like that, a pain that darkens life.
Yeah, you know, I felt like that was so helpful for me when I read that, when I was doing research for the book. And the psychic is like just unbearable psychological pain. And that's what it is. I mean, the reason that people die by suicide is because they are overwhelmed with pain. It's a pain problem, and it feels like death is the solution to the pain. Like, they don't want to die. They just want their pain to end. And that's the lie of suicide. The lie of suicide is that it's going to make all my pain go away. And yes, it does, because you're dead. But for the rest of us, all it does is heap more pain onto everybody that you love. You think you're doing them a favor by dying, but what you're really doing is just heaping a bunch more pain onto the shoulders of everyone you love. What's super helpful to me too, the psychiatrist told us this after he passed away, that 90% of suicides are impulsive. It's an impulsive, in the moment, overwhelmed with pain, and it feels like that's the only way out. Ann Voskamp, in a blog that she wrote one time, described it as being trapped in a burning building, and the only way to escape the flames was to jump out the window. I thought that was such a beautiful description. And I feel like I have so much empathy for Andrew now, and what I've walked through, and what you have walked through too, and grief, and just the overwhelming pain of, is this pain ever going to go away? Am I going to have to wake up every single day and live in this pain and carry this pain and feel this pain? And there are some days where that feels absolutely unbearable. Yeah. So I've developed, even more compassion and empathy for him in my grief.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Which is supernatural, because that is, the tendency is just to, you either get bitter or you get better. Yeah. There's two choices, typically. Why do you think, Kayla, this is a question for me, why do you think that this is such an issue with men? I know it happens with women, but the statistics don't lie. It's so much more common among men. Why do you think that is? You've done a lot of research, and I'm just curious.
Yeah. Statistically, I think it's actually women that attempt suicide more, but men actually complete suicide more. I don't know, I don't have a PhD. I don't know the reason behind that. So I feel like I can't even really answer that question.
Oh yeah. I didn't know if you've done any, Rod was asking too. He said, what would you say are warning signs? Because I know Andrew had told you, I think I just want to die. Or, had actually expressed a suicide ideation. I'm going to do this. And so what would you say? Obviously that's a warning sign, but even before that, can you look back and see warning signs?
And that is statistically, they do say that when somebody dies by suicide, that they have admitted it at some point. Like, usually they have tried to tell somebody, and usually it goes sideways. And that was the case for us. He tried to be open with me, and he tried to be honest with me. And I was trying to be open and honest with him. It started out as a conversation of me complaining about how exhausted I was and how long the day had been and how tired I was. And then his response to that was, he is exhausted, he was tired, and he was up in the middle of the night before and thought about killing himself. And so in my exhaustion and in my emotion, my reaction to him was, how dare you? That is the most selfish thing you could ever do. Like, I cannot believe you said that. You would never do that. Like, it was the worst reaction. Like, that is not what you're supposed to say to somebody that's telling you that they have suicidal thoughts. And he said that to me. He said, Kayla, that is not what you say. You need to come up with something better to say. Like, that's not what you say. And he's completely right. But I think so often that's what we say. I think so often we're so drained and we're so close and we're so in our emotions that it's really, really hard to separate ourselves and to step back and to zoom out and to be like, okay, right now, the word suicide should be like, all these lights should be going off in my mind and on the dashboard. Like, this is a time to shut up. It's a time to lean in. It's a time to open my ears. It's a time to ask questions. I wish I would have asked him, like, do you have a suicide plan? What problem are you trying to solve through suicide? How often do you think about it? How far have you gone with it? Have you Googled it? Have you researched it? Do you know how you would do it? I wish I would have asked him every single day if he was suicidal. I think that word made me feel so uncomfortable. And I think that's what that word does. The word suicide, the word depression, the word anxiety are very uncomfortable. They make us feel very uncomfortable. And so I think in that moment, I just completely pushed it off the table. I was like, that would never happen. He's never going to do that. He wouldn't do that to me and the kids. I didn't understand. And so when someone says that to us, you know, it's time to lean in. It's time to listen. It's time to ask questions. It's time to take it seriously. Like, pick up the suicide hotline number, like call the suicide hotline and just ask questions. It's not even something that you have to call in crisis. You can call. I could have like had him go to bed that night and then call and be like, hey, my husband told me this, like, what should I do? What are the next steps? I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell our therapist or his psychiatrist or his family. Like, I really, truly just brushed it off and thought that would never happen. And it's a huge, huge, huge regret because it did.
What would you say warning signs in like younger people, we've had a child in our community, actually a staff member at our church whose son died by suicide during quarantine. And so, I mean, are there any things that you can say, make sure you don't ignore that? I mean, we all kind of know some things, but
yeah,
I'm sure there's things that you've learned.
Yeah, you know, I think that's the thing of suicide, is that there are warning signs. You know, there are things like if somebody tells you that they're suicidal, like, that's a huge warning sign. Sure. Isolation, I think, is a huge warning sign. I think when there's social disconnection, like they're not spending time with friends, or they're being bullied at school, or you know, there's so many ways now that young people can be affected emotionally with you know, Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram and all the different ways that like being left out socially is on display. I cannot imagine, like, I'm so grateful that that was not a thing when I was in junior high and high school, because I cannot imagine. And I think it's so hard too, because it is such an impulsive thing. Like the psychiatrist told us, like 90%, you know, 90% is impulsive. And so there's no way to fully predict when and if that's going to happen. But what we can do is love our people well and ask questions, you know, ask questions, be present. If you feel like something's off, like, sit down and have a conversation. Be a safe space for people. Be the person that people feel comfortable coming to. And yeah, I think we can recognize some of the warning signs of just isolation and depression. And, you know, there's medication too. If people are taking medication, like, that's sometimes the side effect of medication is suicidal thoughts or actions. And so I think being very aware of all of that and asking about it a ton, like saying the word suicide. Have you thought about suicide? Like, be annoying about it. Ask about it a lot, especially with teenagers. I think even if your teenager is healthy, you know, I think it's a good conversation to have, even if your teenager has never struggled with their mental health that you know of. I think it's still a good conversation to have of like, hey, have you ever like thought about suicide, or do you and your friends ever talk about suicide, or has any of your friends ever mentioned that word to you? You know, I think just like making that a comfortable conversation in our homes and even with our friends, like that's a conversation we could have with our girlfriends or in a small group setting too. So I think we can all just become more comfortable with the language.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so good. You know, I think the other thing too, you were talking about just social media and being left out. I mean, I think that is just such a big, big piece of it. And a warning sign would be when friends are, you know, obviously coming to a parent and saying, hey, I think something's off. But yeah, I fully agree. I can't even imagine growing up with TikTok and Snapchat and having to be on a run or all those things that they do. I'm like, are you kidding me? That is so incredibly exhausting.
It's constant. It's like constant communication. Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I can't either.
Yeah.
So on page 70 in the book, you said it wasn't just mental and physical, it was spiritual. And you talked about a little bit about spiritual warfare. For those of us who, you know, I didn't grow up learning about spiritual warfare, and I didn't learn, you know, nobody was talking about the demonic, the, you know, spiritual realm, the second heaven. Like, no one was mentioning those things when I was growing up. So everything was just blamed on illness. And there was no, you know, unless somebody was like, I mean, I don't know. I don't think disease ever had a spiritual component. And so could you speak to the warfare that Andrew experienced, and what, I mean, just like people dealing with that? Because I do think, I mean, I think mental illness is very, very demonic.
It's all of it, you know, and I think sometimes people's experience with mental illness is that's not a part of it at all. But with Andrew, it was. And so that's why I felt it was important to include it in the book, because it was a very real part of his journey, and a part that freaked him out. So his first experience with spiritual warfare was our 1-year wedding anniversary. And I recount that in the book, our 1-year wedding anniversary, where he just had this moment in the shower, and he actually shared it with our church from the stage too. So I felt very comfortable sharing it in the book. But he had this moment where he felt like, for him, he physically saw things that he described as like a creature. So he would see, oh no, is my internet not working? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, it's a little glitchy, but I can hear you fine. I can hear you fine. You're just
okay.
It's
I'm
fine.
in my bedroom.
You're good.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure, because a thing popped up on my screen that said my internet was unstable. So I just wanted to make sure.
It was a little. It's fine. It's fine.
So he had this one at our 1-year anniversary. We were at a hotel in Pasadena, and he had just this encounter with a dark presence in the shower. And it was terrifying, to the point where I was laying on the bed watching a show, and I just heard him in the bathroom crying, and I walk in and he's curled up on the floor of the shower, weeping, totally terrified, absolutely terrified. And I just prayed over him. I asked him about it. He told me what he saw, and I just prayed over him, and we went and laid in the bed, and that was it. He never really brought it up again. And then during his mental health journey, he would have nightmares often. Nightmares often where same thing, there's creatures in his nightmares. And then he had an experience that I talk about in the book too, where I was on the porch with the boys, and he was back in the bedroom resting, and he felt like there were 5 creatures in the room. It's always what he called them, was creatures, that were talking to him and saying things to him. And he got up and went to every corner of the room and prayed them away. But when I walked into the room, he's literally hiding under the covers, crying and shaking, terrified. So it was a really, really very real part of the journey for him. I didn't see anything that he was seeing. I walked into the room. I'm like, what are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Is this part of the mental illness? What is going on? And I know hallucinations can be part of the mental health journey and can be a side effect of addiction, and I fully acknowledge that. But I also believe in spiritual warfare and believe that the enemy uses that too. So I don't know. I will never know if it was hallucinations or if it was spiritual warfare. But what I do know is that it was really freaky for Andrew. It was absolutely terrifying, and he felt oppressed. He would constantly talk about how the enemy after him, and how when he was going to go back to work, it was going to ramp up. That big attack in our bedroom happened right before he went back to work, and he had predicted that was going to happen. And so, I think his mental health journey was a combination of depression, anxiety, and spiritual warfare. And so that was really important for me to include that in the book. I called it Stranger Things, the chapter, because I know it's weird. I know it's not something that people feel comfortable talking about. For me, it's still a little bit uncomfortable even talking about, but it was a very real part of his journey. And I think it's also something that we can get more comfortable with, just like we can get more comfortable with the language surrounding mental illness. I think we can get more comfortable talking about that kind of thing, about spiritual warfare, and asking questions about that too. Do you have nightmares? What do you see in your nightmares? How can I pray for you? Do you feel a heaviness? Do you feel fear? Have you been seeing things? I think normalizing that conversation too is so important for all of us.
Oh gosh, 100%. Yeah. So what would be, Kayla, the next step if someone did say they had thought about suicide? Because a lot of people, a lot of people have ideations and they have no mental illness, no thought. They just had a bad day. Yeah. So what would be the next step for somebody? Because I think a lot of people are afraid of being like committed, like having to check in. We call it Peachford here, to check in, getting checked into Peachford if you admitted that. So I think there's a stigma. So what would you say next steps for somebody who had admitted that?
I think that you always have to take it seriously. I think it has to be taken seriously every single time, even if you know that they would never do it, even if they know that they would never do it. I think it has to be taken seriously. And I've called friends and told them I'm suicidal today. On my grief journey, I have a few girlfriends that I feel super comfortable with, and I've picked up the phone and told them I need to tell somebody I'm feeling suicidal today. I'm fine. I'm not going to act on it. I know it's not the solution. I'm just overwhelmed with pain and overwhelmed with life today, and I don't feel like doing my life today. And I know that I have these safe people that I can be super honest with, and they're not going to call the mental health institution, and they're not going to call the police because they trust me, and they know that they know that I know that that's not the solution to my pain. But I think taking it seriously, and I think for those of us that have had those thoughts and haven't told anybody, like, it's time to tell somebody. Like, if you have those thoughts, I think the enemy would want you to feel isolated and alone and like it's no big deal. But it is a big deal, and you need to tell somebody, and it needs to be brought into the light. And so that's why I purposely pick up the phone and call people when I have a day like that, because I know that it's not just a bad day. I know that it's not just a pain-filled moment. There's also a spiritual component to everything in life. There's a spiritual component. So just acknowledging that and bringing it to the light and not allowing the enemy to isolate me in that, I think, is so important.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You talk at the end of the book, I think it's like page 130, about fear being really the root of all things, which, there's not a one of us on this call that haven't had an increase in fear due to just the what we're living in, this world that we're living in, which also, in California, the statistics, 600% increase in suicides in California. And I think that is totally—
I didn't know that. When you shared that with me, I didn't know that. I'm not surprised, but I didn't know that.
I know. I was like, I'm not shocked one bit. There's so much fear mongering everywhere. Yeah. But you do talk about some signs that fear may be ruling your life. Will you talk about those? Because I thought those were really, really good.
I'd have to refresh my memory.
I can tell you.
You tell me. I have a book in front of me. I have my book memorized.
No, it's so good. It's so good. So we settle for less. I'd love to just talk about each one.
Yeah,
settle for less. So how did you see that played out in Andrew's life, if you did?
Gosh, Rachel, I honestly feel like I need to have my book in front of me. Can I go? I need to refresh my memory. Well, I don't even remember. I wrote it so long ago.
Fear can cause us to shrink back from our dreams and aspirations, which I totally think is the tiny voice that whispers you could never do that. Which I just, that is such a, a marker of people. I think too, a marker of fear is when you actually can't think of a dream. It's like, oh, well, that's for those people, or that's for, whoever. And then the second one was, how do we know that fear could be ruling our life? When we say yes, but we want to say no. I thought that was so interesting. Fear of letting people down can cause us to respond with a quick yes when it would be best to say no. Did you see that in Andrew's life?
There's fear in everything. There's literally fear in everything. Like every single day, there's fear in a lot of different things. Sending our kids to school, getting on a Zoom call, going to the grocery, anything, there can be fear everywhere. And, the perspective that I found when I was writing it is that sometimes fear could be good for us. It's not always a bad thing. Fear can also be a good thing, and it floods our body with endorphins and oxygen, and, gets us going to be able to perform for what we need to do. And, there's moments where people are literally able to save other people's lives because their fight or flight or freeze, response kicked in, and they were able to step in and do miraculous things. And so it's an amazing part of who we are and being humans. But I think it can also destroy us. I think it can also destroy us, and I think it can run wild quick. And that's, you know, I got the title, I was researching panic attacks, and one definition of panic attacks was fear gone wild, because that's what happens when this panic attack would start for my husband. It would literally take over his whole body. Like his eyes would glaze over and he would be completely gone. Like I couldn't touch him until he came out of it. Like I wouldn't be able to reach him until he came out of it. And I think if we don't get a handle on it quick, if we don't acknowledge what it is quick, like, oh, I'm feeling afraid right now. Like, oh, that's not, you know, like I need to in that moment out loud pray, or I need to in that moment just acknowledge that and welcome that and then release that. Like, I think we can just do such a better job of being aware, being emotionally aware of what we're feeling and where in our body we're feeling it and how it's affecting us. And I've had to fight so much fear and writing this book and speaking about this book and doing crazy interviews and putting this book out to the world. Like, it's all scary, you know, but what's been so helpful to me is to literally like pray out loud before I do anything. There was a little mantra. My husband did a message at church one time and he called it pray first. And we have these little God's Got This wristbands. He even made a God's Got This wristband that said pray first on it. I think that can be so powerful. Like if you're feeling fear headed into a meeting, or maybe you're full of anxiety even leaving your house right now with COVID and everything going on, or maybe there's fear of your kids and you know, what could happen to them. I think anytime we feel that fear, acknowledging that and giving it to God, that's what's been so helpful to me, is just acknowledging it, asking God to take it away, or asking God to funnel it in a good way, and asking for his peace. And, you know, he will always bring his peace. He will always bring his supernatural peace. Like peace is possible even in the midst of fear. And I truly believe that. And it's just so helpful for me to say that out loud in those moments too.
No, that's such a good reminder. I know, Kayla, for me, when Rod had anxiety and depression, I was so angry. God, the anger was just like overwhelming because I'd never dealt with someone. I always describe anxiety and depression as holding sand. Like it's like next to near impossible to hold it, because it's so different for every person.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is like, you know, it's not like you need an antibiotic. It's not a bacteria that you need an antibiotic for. And we know that's going to clear it up and you're going to be, you know, your kidneys are going to flush it out and you're done. It's just not like that. So it feels just so like intangible and hard to understand. And so I really dealt with a lot of anger, like, why didn't you tell me? Why weren't you more honest? You should have known about this. You should have gotten help before, you know, it was right after we got married. So how have you dealt with your own anger?
I'd say it's similar to the fear, where I welcome it. You know, I think feelings are good for us. I think we're supposed to feel feelings. And I think oftentimes we don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel our feelings. And so we reach for the thing that's going to numb it and take it away. If I could reach for Instagram and scroll through that, or see likes coming in and that, you know, kick endorphins off in my mind and make me feel better. I could reach for a TV show, or I could reach for a glass of wine, or I could reach for anything to numb the pain. And I think what I've learned through all of this, that anger can be good for me, that fear can be good for me, that I can welcome all of these emotions and they are all for my healing. All of them are for my healing. And so I think acknowledging that and welcoming them and not being afraid of them. Like if I need to scream, I tell the boys, like, I'm going to scream. You want to scream with me? I'm feeling like super angry. I'm feeling stressed out. Like, let's all do a big scream together, and we'll be like in the car just screaming at the top of their lungs. Like, I get angry. I for sure get angry. There's days where I'm mad at Andrew. I'm mad that this happened. You know, I'm mad that this is my life. It feels so unjust. It feels so wrong. Like this should have never happened. I get mad at God. Like, God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow this to be my life? Like, I did not sign up for this. I did not sign up to be a single mom and sole provider for 3 little kids. Like, I do get angry. And I think it's not shaming ourselves for any of those emotions, not shaming ourselves for our anger, not shaming ourselves for our fear, not shaming ourselves for our sadness. I think oftentimes, even in American culture, like, you're supposed to just get over it. You're supposed to be sad for a little bit, and then you're supposed to just get over it.
And that's Christian. That's the Christian way to be, Kayla.
Oh, totally.
That's not American.
That's so true. Like, you're so right.
Add an extra layer of, but you're a Christian and you have hope. You have hope that you got to grieve with that hope that nobody else has. I mean, that verse literally almost undid me. It's an awesome verse, but it put this pressure on me.
Yeah. And it's so not natural. Like we are emotional beings. We are emotional people, and we are allowed to feel every single emotion. And so there's a little prayer called the welcoming prayer. I would totally butcher it if I tried to say it out loud, but if you Google the welcoming prayer, it is a beautiful prayer, and it talks about welcoming all those emotions and how they're for your healing and how they're for your good. And that little prayer has been so helpful to me. I think I have it posted to my Instagram feed, but yeah, like I think I sat in my therapist office one day, and I asked her, I'm like, when do I start taking medication for this? Because like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to feel depressed. I don't want to feel suicidal. I don't want to feel angry. I don't want to feel any of this anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And she's like, are you getting out of bed? I said, yeah. She's like, are you making food for your kids? I said, yeah. She's like, are you able to work? I said, yeah. She's like, well then Kayla, like that's all natural. That's all normal. That's all part of your healing. Those emotions and those feelings are meant for your healing, and they're meant, to help you. And I think that was so helpful to me. I think so often we just reach for the thing that's going to make it all go away. But to know that all of that's normal, and to normalize that, like, yeah, I yelled at my kids today, or yeah, I got mad at Andrew today, or yeah, I got mad at God today. Like, we don't need to shame ourselves or anybody for any kind of emotion.
Mm-hmm. Did you know how to do that before Andrew died? I'm such a stuffer. So like for me to try and learn that in the moment of my husband's, it just didn't happen, obviously. So how did you learn to do that, Kayla? Because to me, that's a really learned skill, especially when you grow up in the South. You don't tend
totally.
to be, okay with emotions, especially negative ones.
I think that's been part of my healing process. And I have really beautiful friends that like show me the welcoming prayer. Like I have really beautiful friends that have helped lead me and guide me and sit with me, and like conversations like that with my therapist. And yeah, I think it's just been part of my healing. I for sure, I wouldn't say that I was like that before. I'm a completely different person and have learned so much. Grief and death and loss has expanded the way that I see life, has expanded the way that I see God, has expanded the way I see spirituality. Like the way that I see life is completely different than the way I used to see life. And that's what it does. It strips you of everything. It strips you down and it changes you.
Oh yeah. Oh, you have a completely different life. It's never the same. And honestly, Kayla, it's a higher level of living, wouldn't you say?
I would say, yeah. Yes. I wouldn't ever wish this. I think I've said this a lot to friends. Like, I would never ask for this. I would never wish for this to happen, but I am so grateful for the perspective that I have. Mm-hmm. Like, I would never have asked for this. I would have never wanted this. But man, like I'm 31 years old. So at 31 years old, to have this perspective on life, I feel like is such a gift that I never asked to receive.
Kayla, somebody just asked a question that said, I really struggle when someone appears to be doing fine, and then all of a sudden you hear that they committed suicide. It's just that, like they were okay. Like what, how does it go? And they tend to think a person's pain can go from like, just a little match to like a raging fire with no warning, which is basically what you were saying. But that feels so hard to understand. And do you have any perspective on that?
I think what's been super helpful to me is to put suicide in the same category as a tragic accident. Mm-hmm. It is a tragic accident and no one is to blame. That person didn't even want to die. They wanted to escape their pain. There's been studies done on suicidal people that have attempted suicide and survived. Like they went through with it, but they didn't die and they survived. And like 99% of them said that as soon as they jumped or as soon as they did whatever they were going to do to die, they instantly regretted it. Mm-hmm. And so I think just realizing and understanding that like it isn't something that this is just for me personally, what's helped me is that it isn't something that Andrew chose. I think Andrew would be absolutely shocked if he was standing next to me today and I told him what happened. Mm-hmm. I think he would be absolutely shocked and stunned and surprised that that actually happened. Like, he didn't want to die. He just wanted his pain to end. And so I think realizing that it's a pain problem, and we will never know another person's pain. I think that's helpful too. So, when it's like this, why did that happen? I never saw that coming. And a lot of time their story's not like my story, where there's all these, it's like this story of it, how it unfolded. And for a lot of people, it's not. It's like one day they were great and the next day they were gone. Mm-hmm. And so I think just understanding that we do not know what it's like to walk in anybody else's shoes but our own. We do not know what it's like to live in anybody else's mind than our own. We don't know what pain anybody else is carrying in their deep personal struggles and in their mind that they're not sharing with anybody. Mm-hmm. And I think also understanding that it's not a choice. Even for me, my language has shifted since Andrew died, and I don't even say committed suicide. I say that he died by suicide. The word committed
because of you. I truly have and we work with a lot of widows whose husbands have committed suicide, and now it's like they died by suicide. I never say committed. Well, I just said it, but I was just making a point. But that is, my language has changed because your language changed, which I appreciate that so much. It's beautiful. It really makes it so clear.
That small shift. It's such a small shift in language, but it really does. It's so helpful. Even for my boys, as they get older, that language, like daddy died by suicide. Mm-hmm. Daddy didn't commit suicide. Commit is a word that we use to attach to phrases like committed a sin or committed a murder or committed crime. Like, it puts blame on the person. It puts blame on the person that died. And so I want to take that blame off of Andrew. It is not his fault. It's an absolute tragedy, and no one is to blame. Not me, not Andrew, not the doctors, not the medication. Like, people are so quick to want to point the finger to someone. And it's an absolute tragedy, and no one is to blame.
Karen made the point on the chat. She just said there are no negative emotions. It's just an indicator of what you're believing. There's, no emotions are negative. And I think so many times, like, fear would be negative, or, anger is negative. You can't let the sun go down on your anger. There's just so many rules that
I'm not allowed to feel that way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's evil, if you feel that way, if you're angry towards that person. But it's a belief, it points to what you're believing, which I so love that. As we close, Kayla, two things. So share with us, as a friend, as a member of the big C, of the big church, what can we do? What are some practical things? People always ask me, what can I do for someone who's grieving? I'm like, just show up at their door. Like, truly, like, go to their house and take a cake, or take Chick-fil-A biscuits. Just go there. Like, it's so powerful. But what would you say would be your, for the church, if you could say, church, do this?
Mm-hmm. I would say stop making mental illness a faith issue and a sin issue, and start leaning in and listening to people and trying to find a way to sit with people in their pain.
So good. So good. Yeah, I love it. Will you pray? Let me ask, if there anybody else have any questions for Kayla? We'll just take a couple of more. If anybody has any, just put them in the chat. But Kayla, would you pray for everyone on this call? I know there are a lot of people on here who have experienced suicide in their families. They've been left behind. Obviously, they're on the call. Yeah. But will you pray for those family members who are hurting, who feel lost, who are just, I just feel like there's so many people on this call who are just trying to make sense. Yeah. And that's, next to near impossible, but I think God can make it all so clear as the story unfolds. So will you pray for them?
Can I read the welcoming prayer? Yes, I pulled it up on my phone because I think it's super powerful, and I'll read the welcoming prayer and then I'll pray. Okay. Let's go straight to
everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, close your eyes, y'all. Y'all receive this as Kayla reads it over us.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and God's action within. Amen.
Amen.
I'll pray. God, thank you so much that we can come together on Zoom calls, that we can connect with people all over America and sit together, God, and talk about hard things. Thank you for the space and the grace to talk about hard things. God, I pray for my friends that might be on this call tonight, God, that are grieving, that are hurting, that are overwhelmed with pain and feel like that pain is never going to go away and are struggling to know how to live with it. God, I pray that you would show them, that you would teach them, that you would lead them, that you would show them how to build a beautiful life around that pain. God, that you would surround them with community, that you would surround them with safe people, that you would surround them with people with hearts of empathy that can sit with them in their pain and truly share in their pain with them. Yeah. God, I thank you that we have each other. I thank you that we have this community. I thank you for all the beautiful things you're doing through Be Still Ministries. God, I know you are moving and you are allowing conversations like this to happen, God, and ears to be opened and eyes to be opened and hearts to be opened, God. And so I just thank you for what your Spirit is doing tonight, even, God, right now on the Zoom call. How amazing is that, God, that you are on the move and that you are healing hearts and that you are with us. God, I thank you that there is nowhere we can go from your presence, that we can call on you, that we can talk to you, that we can weep with you, that we can sit with you. God, I thank you for being with us when we feel alone, when we've lost our husband and we feel alone and we feel overwhelmed, God, with that overwhelming loneliness and pain. I thank you that you're with us and sitting right beside us and catching every tear, God. And I pray that you would make us strong and bold and brave and courageous and gentle and kind. God, that we would be able to show your love and shine your light into the really dark spaces, God. I pray that you would teach us to love others like you, and I thank you for the ways you already have. God, I love you, I praise you, I bless you, and I thank you. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kayla. This was so awesome. I'm so grateful. I know so many people are going to find so much healing in this conversation. And thank you all for being with us tonight and joining us.